good.
We're good. We're great.
We're great, actually.
Are we?
It's been a long couple of days, but there's honestly nowhere I would rather be than on this tattoo table with you gentlemen. Adorable dog. Thank you. Yes.
After the day we've had.
We learned that this is home intrusion, not invasion.
Yeah, that's what it
Because
was.
Shallow's not home.
It's not a wasn't a robbery because they're not home. What is
No,
it? It
it's
is a robbery.
It's not a home invasion.
Correct. It's a home invasion if they're here.
Yeah.
And then something about if you tie them up or don't tie them up, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'd still tie them up.
Tie them up. Yeah, always tie them up.
Tie them up.
Blindfolds preferably.
Fucking choke.
You know, I got to tell you that word. Jeez.
Vegas flashbacks. Sorry. It's getting to an interesting hour of the day where this is the content we're putting out. Anyways, this conversation, we sat down with Killian. So this is Matt, myself, and James Thayer here. We sat down with Killian Hamilton, mayor of nowhere, we established. Really cool conversation. We talked about the emerging prevalence of people leaning too hard on research in the social media space and kind of basing all of their knowledge on research. And not only doing that, but also downplaying the value that comes with experience. So that's kind of the big caveat with this one, is that we highlighted how valuable experience is, and not just experience, but in-person experience, especially with training clients, especially now with COVID and all the gym shutdowns over the last couple of years. We have people that are coming into the training space as an online coach without any in-person experience. And it's a really weird time to see that happening. So we really just kind of talked about the value that we bring from experience and how to appraise information that you're getting from research and where that fits into this whole thing. So I thought it was a really cool conversation around that. A lot of really good takeaways as we went into those topics. Good experience from everyone's point of view. And then on top of that, I think something really valuable to add to this, if you guys haven't already, I would check out the Prescript Collective. Because it is literally a collective of experience of some of the best coaches from around the world. And not saying that you have to be a very high-level coach to hop into this. I think any coach, there's a ton of value from some of the emerging ideas lectures that Killian's taken on. Eric Bagheera is a huge part of the collective. He's the legwork behind it. He keeps this thing up and running. Yeah, he keeps it organized. He makes sure that you get the information that you're seeking out. So we have the Discord group associated with that, which is a really cool add-on because you can get peer-reviewed knowledge in the blink of an instance, any time of the day. We have people all over the world that are super active in that. So you can hop in with any questions that you have, even if it's just a thought process that you want to vet. A lot of times people realize that they're on the right track, and it's just positive affirmation, and the things that they're doing are working. So it's a really cool way to get a lot of experience, a lot of collective experience really quickly.
Yeah, so it's the sounding board for you as a coach, whatever thought process you're currently dealing with, or even coming into it with client problems or business stuff. Like, we have so many different channels that we are able to touch on and use the collective experience from these coaches from all over the world. Like, the year's worth of knowledge that I think is in that Discord channel is unmatched.
Yeah.
And for the price, it's unbeatable.
Yeah.
$35 a month, you get access to everyone, anything. All of the Prescript coaches are on there at some stage or point, or within that, we've got access to it with the courses that kind of come up. We've got Dwayne that's in there with the nutrition. We've got the business. It's just it's everything. It pretty much is everything. It's every aspect of your business, face to face, online. It's there. Yeah. And I think it's a resource that if you can use it in the way that we've intended it to be used, it's going to elevate you to that elite status of trainer within the industry. So definitely hop on that. If you're not on the collective, I would highly, highly suggest jumping on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good synopsis of it, and there's a ton of value in there. So we really just want to help you guys get better at your craft, and that's all it is. And like Max said, we're all in there. So if you want to talk to any of us, just tag us and we'll respond, which is kind of cool.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for listening, guys. Shout out to our sponsor, HD Muscle. code RX'D
XD.
at checkout, and that's going to get you 10% off your supplement order. You can pair that with any offer they have going on. Make sure to check it out. Thanks for listening. Hit it, Lundy.
You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. We got the crew here. We got James Thayer, Mayor of Kansas, Killian Hamilton,
Mayor of Nowhere.
Mayor of Nowhere. How should I introduce you?
That's me.
That's you? Just Mayor of Nowhere?
Yeah, it's just
Killian
Mayor of
Hamilton,
Nowhere.
Mayor of Nowhere. We have Matt Penny.
Don't call me the mayor of Hamilton. I don't
No,
want to
no.
be the mayor of Hamilton.
A resident of Hamilton might be bad enough.
Yeah, I don't even know if you want to be a resident.
I live in Stony Creek, okay?
And for those who don't know, Stony Creek is like nice.
Okay.
It's
All right,
also
good.
part of Hamilton, so
Good.
it's.
Try to help you, Matt.
Yeah, threw yourself
I gotta
right
knock
under the
myself
bus
down
there.
a peg.
Oh, man.
And then
Yeah.
we didn't introduce you.
Do people care? I don't care
They do.
anymore.
Tell
I don't
us more.
care anymore.
Who is Jordan?
Who
Jutta?
is?
Yeah, this is the new podcast. Who's Jordan Jutta?
Yo, I feel very on the spot right now, and I just don't know who I am.
Who's the man behind?
So
it?
now you
trying
live
to-
in San Jose.
I currently live in San Jose.
But explain to
Currently.
people where, before we actually get into the point of this podcast, just explain to people where Dallas, Pennsylvania is. Because since meeting you, I've met a lot of people from Pennsylvania.
Have you?
Yeah.
Like what regions? What areas?
Where's what's that beer called?
Yingling.
Yingling.
I knew it had to be.
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
it's like
Yingling.
the longest operating brewery in America.
Yeah, so wherever that place is.
Pottstown, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm probably like 45 minutes. Dallas is probably like 45 minutes from that.
Nice.
I don't know which direction.
Because Pennsylvania, I think people think Pittsburgh,
Yes.
I would assume.
Number
and
one,
Philly,
Philadelphia. Yeah, number two.
which also seem like really different cities to me, Pittsburgh
Absolutely.
and Philadelphia.
Yeah.
They seem like two different states. Like
Yeah.
I think of Pittsburgh as its own state.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah.
Pittsburgh's
Very-
like the Hamilton, I would
got-
say.
I always
Yes,
refer to
yes.
Hamilton as a poor man's Pittsburgh, which is
Pittsburgh's like a working town.
Yeah.
Like the steel industry, coal, I think was big
Yeah.
there.
But
Not
what's
much.
Dallas?
Dallas is literally a blip. Like it's nothing.
Okay.
I think the population of Dallas is 6,000 people.
Wow. So is Pennsylvania New England?
No, I think
Okay.
New England is like New Hampshire
Like
area.
New Hampshire, Massachusetts, I think is
Yeah.
New England.
Yeah.
Connecticut, I think is New England.
is Maine?
Maine, I guess Maine
So
is
it's like
New
the
England.
very northeast
Yeah.
of the United States. Yeah.
American geography is insane to me.
I don't get it, and I've been born here and taught it in grade school.
but then,
but-
so is Pennsylvania south?
Yeah, south. It's like I'm not the best person to ask. It's right up against New York,
Okay.
New Jersey. I don't know what's below it. West Virginia, maybe.
Okay.
Virginia.
Well, yeah, West Virginia and Pennsylvania make sense to border one another.
Yeah, and then there's Ohio over here.
Yeah. Wherever that is.
Yeah,
it's like wedged right in the armpit of the lake, right? So
Yeah.
it's like you got the metaphorical and the literal armpit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ohio.
Sorry.
Yeah, right on Lake Erie.
Yeah.
Like it butts up against Lake Erie.
Right.
Shout out to everyone from Ohio.
We love you.
Get out while you still can. All right, and that's, I guess, you, the guy from Dallas.
I'm the
Not
guy from
Texas.
Dallas. Yeah, the place you've never heard of and never want to go to.
Yeah.
So
But would you say there's any similarities to Dallas, Texas from Dallas, Pennsylvania?
less cool, much smaller, not much to do, but people like guns.
So the people like guns.
The guns part. We got to the guns.
Got to the guns,
yeah. So you have to go down the list, but there's a similarity.
Right, okay. So that's comforting.
Trucks.
So it's
People like trucks, big trucks in Dallas.
Yeah. That's a Hamilton thing too. So like that's
Yeah.
where our Venn diagram sort of intersects, right?
Yeah.
Is trucks. And then with Texas it intersects on guns.
Right.
And what's in the middle? What do you think intersects
Drugs.
all three?
Drugs. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Dallas is like a methy place.
Yeah.
Hamilton's got a big
methy place.
fentanyl.
Fentanyl now.
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
Yeah.
I can
Meth
see
is
that.
a big one too, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what about Kansas? I feel
we
James-
did a whole
we've been
episode on it.
We did a
You did a whole
yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right, so we didn't need to cover
terrible.
Kansas.
Yeah, don't listen to that.
It's
one.
terrible. Got it.
Yeah.
Solid.
Yeah. But yeah, we're here.
We're here now,
We're here in Miami, which is its own place.
which is zero place, actually. Miami should not exist.
I don't understand how it does exist. It doesn't
It's-
just implode.
Apparently, it's not supposed to. So
In
this
what
is a-
way?
It's a fake place. Like, this was a swamp that they demolished to put hotels on.
Interesting.
So Miami-Dade is actually, like where we are right now, Miami is a collection. I think it's the actual, like, a collection of the most, like, incorporated communities and towns. So Miami, as we understand it, isn't actually Miami. Miami is very tiny. And it's like kind of, I think, where we might be now, somewhat to some extent. Miami Beach is its own town.
Mm-hmm.
Coral Gables, its own town. Miami Springs, its own. They are all separate from one another, and they incorporated with one another.
Okay, so how does this dovetail into the dirt bike gangs?
Oh, well, everything dovetails into dirt bike gangs.
The heritage here.
Yeah, it's the culture. But Miami-Dade's a real weird place because all these places were separate at one point, and they've just been amalgamated over time. And I think that's actually what causes a lot of the socioeconomic problems here.
You can feel that as you walk like 3 blocks. It's like you're going through 3 different cities.
Exactly.
It's
crazy.
crazy.
They were all at one point very different from one another.
Yeah, that definitely shows.
This is the one place in the world that I've been to that had a culture shock similar to Japan, which is an insane thing to say considering I also live in North America. Mm-hmm. But it's just that Japan was the only place I went to where everything was completely different. Like the style of architecture was different. All the houses were different. People's careers were different. Everyone looked different. And I was the only white, tall guy in a million years, right? But coming down here, it was different in a different way. But like all of the houses again were different. All the architecture was different. The people were really different. We came here on a Saturday, and the Saturdays in Wynwood, what am I even saying Saturdays? It's a lawless place.
Yeah.
It's
There's no
straight
Saturday.
I went downstairs at 10:30 Monday night last night, and it sounded like I was going into a nightclub. Out just on the street. On the street. Yeah, it's a lawless place.
Yeah, but there's something endearing about the lawlessness of it, right? Like it's weird for me because, as you know, we've discussed a lot about how I like structure in my life. But coming here was like it's almost like a vacation from myself, right? I just just go with it, man. Like if somebody offers you something,
whoever you want to be,
just take it and go home immediately.
Yeah, you can do any drugs, but do them in your own home.
Yeah.
Just don't do them on the street.
Very considerate.
Yeah.
If you do them on the street, I will take a photo of you, whether or not you give me permission. But but I think I always try and create a segue from the bullshit that we talk about.
It's the hardest thing to do.
But I think this is an interesting segue because none of us are from here.
Right.
And like you said, there's a chaos, but there's like an accepted chaos. And like this is a society that seemingly works and has a functioning, to some extent, government. People are employed. People have housing. You come from a place where people are employed, have housing. Someone has a functional government. We all come from societies as we know them in a modern definition. But all of our experiences, although we might cross-sect at some part of this Venn diagram and go, okay, we each have this experience, we all have very different experiences over 30-plus years, but we all arrive at accurate perceptions of things. You know, like you grew up in Dallas, Pennsylvania. You know what, is relatively good and bad. Yeah. You grew up, I don't even know where you grew up.
I grew up in Georgetown, Ontario.
Oh, okay. Well, rich Matt over here.
No. That was the positive interpretation of Georgetown. The negative interpretation of Georgetown was its association with the Klan.
KKK.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, which is like one of the only places in Canada with obviously a very strong.
I never saw any, pointy hoods or anything to that extent. The most that I was ever exposed to it, I grew up in the 90s, right? So the most I was ever exposed to it were the uncomfortable looks that the gas station attendants would give people who weren't white. But that was about it. It was it wasn't really a thing that people talked about, but it was a thing that people who were outside of Georgetown talked about a lot.
Yes.
And where that comes into play is my experience in Georgetown kind of taught me how to navigate the world that I lived in. When I came out of there, it's like, hey, are you from that racist place?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I have a rule book that I've been kind of operating on for the past X years because that's what I grew up on. So I hope not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you turned out fine, though. That's the thing, right? Like, despite your environment.
Despite my environment.
You're not a terrible, evil, racist person.
I would like to say most people come out of Georgetown.
Exactly.
And it's a very different place today than what it used to be, right?
100%.
Yeah.
And like Thayer, you come from
Kansas, and I'm not a serial killer, so
there
it's
you
great.
Go. And it's so interesting that we can all come into this room and none of us are murdering each other or stealing from each other or being bad people. And we all kind of have an idea of how to be successful and get things done. And it all comes from experience, very vastly different experiences. None of us when you use rule book, you're using it's a device, right? You don't actually have a physical rule book that you read.
No, it's a system, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's none of us needed PubMed articles and none of us needed books written by some guy last year to explain how any of us interact. We all did it through experience. A lot of us growing up with parents that grew up in a different generation that taught us their experiences, much of the things they taught us were all good lessons that are still accurate to some extent today. And I think it's a good segue into what we're talking about, which was a post we read, which basically, Matt, you read the post. You say it. I'm not going to interpret it. We don't have to read it verbatim, but what is the... I'll throw us under the bus.
A person had commented on the value of information that's peddled by somebody who has decades of experience in a particular industry. And this particular person who was commenting on this other person having so much experience, saying, "Oh, you don't need to have this much experience. You can't rely on, or you don't need to have this much experience to say this thing. You can't rely on your experience to tell you this. You can't keep." And it's like you can't really use that as a signpost to shit on until you're there.
Yes.
Right? Because like. I can say that because I've lived the I thought I was smarter than everyone else thing, and I went through all those games, and I was like, I don't really understand what brought you all to this place where you do this thing, and then the years go by, and suddenly I'm realizing, okay, that's why you do this thing, that's why it's important, I understand all the systems at play in this now, right? But it takes a lot of time to develop the self-awareness and develop the understanding of the thing that you're working on until all the pieces come together.
Yeah, and I think it's something... not just, I don't want to be the person who doesn't have any university education and then shit on people with university education because they don't have that experience. But it's one thing I notice from people when they're currently enrolled in an education where they see what they perceive to be faults in a system. These things need to change. These things aren't true. There's a better way of doing this. If you were to speak to that same person who had that opinion while they were in school versus once they get to the 20-year mark in that industry, they probably changed nothing about their industry because there was a lot of real-world impacts that changed the perfect utopia you thought could exist,
Yeah, precisely. It's real-world impact is the best phrase that I can think of to describe that. Like the rules of real life are quite a bit different than the rules of the classroom, and it's easy to take the perspective of why don't we just do X, Y, Z, and we'll get outcomes A, B, C. But the problem is real life is very messy, and it's very difficult. Yeah. It's very random and hard to control. Like there's a lot of
chaos.
A lot of chaos. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like I think everyone, and again, I say this for myself, so it must be the same for everyone, kind of moves through life in this perspective that they are the main character of their story, and everyone else is kind of like a non-player character.
Yeah.
And they're just like there. Right, of course. But then you have to remember that this person has their own complex emotions, complex feelings. And I know there's a word to describe all of this, but the point that I'm trying to make here is all of those complex things are what throws your perfect ideal of what you think should happen off the rails. This convalescing that to the reality that surrounds you is going to be the hard part.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, Thayer, you probably have the most experience because you work in
a university.
Yes.
Yeah, and to kind of go off of that, like it really is the experience of it because you can become so siloed and so bubble in a university that not only the lessons are at, 50 minutes to 75, that you're trying to teach these very, very complex issues or thought processes, but it can be so siloed that the person teaching it has never got out into the real world and done anything or built anything, because more often than not, if you're successful outside of university is not a great place that you want to come into because you're not going to make money. Like you're very limited, you're very restricted in what you can do in that. And a lot of times you'll see professors fall into that's the only focus, but never really step outside of understanding the real world, understanding some of the intricacies or developing the experience of when this should actually be applied outside of the textbook. And then kind of with that, students a lot of times don't have that experience to understand the application of the information. Yep. So a lot of times you're just studying to study to try to pass a test without realizing how you can directly apply this, what that experience is, because having the hands-on application and information, a lot of times that's been separated so far in a university setting where it's all theory, it's never application.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they look at research, they get information, right? That's all it is. It's very objective, the way that research is written and the way that research articles are conveyed. But the thing that experience gives you is the ability to not only apply that information, but more importantly, to appraise that information, right? Is to see, okay, these are the variables that they had in this study, which most people don't even read studies.
Well, no, you see, they read the headline where the news takes.
They read the abstract.
And exactly. And they'll take whatever assumption they have from that very shallow context abstract. Yeah. And then they'll start to make assumptions out of that and the internet makes it really easy, especially people with the following, to just put that out into the world. Mm-hmm. And then people have this thing that's maybe not very well informed or not well appraised, I guess is a better way to say it, and they're taking this for fact. And then it starts to spread like wildfire. And there's always these new hot trends because someone takes this information that, may not be wrong, but it's just out of context, and then they take it as fact. And they start to make choices and actions based off of that. But the thing that experience gives you is you can look at this and you can say, okay, what are they really saying? How valuable is this information? What is the context in which it applies? And that's what experience is going to give you, because information is out there. There's so much information. And I think of it as not being right or wrong, but how applicable is it? And if we can't apply it, we can't apply it if we don't know how to appraise it and find that context for that information. I think that's the thing that's missing, especially widely on social media, the way that people convey research.
Yeah, and I think I always look at it like I remember I used to watch this show on TV all the time called American Greed, and it was about finance, and it was about all these like schemes and fraud cases and things like that. And every time I would watch one of these shows, I'd get to the end of it, and I'd think, I understand that these people are victims, but first they're a victim of themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
It's rough, but it's true.
And I know, and I'm not victim blaming. That's not what I'm doing. But what I'm saying, when someone approaches you with an investment and goes, everyone else in the world is getting 2%, I'll give you 22%. Mm-hmm. Just go, no. Because it doesn't make any logical sense. But I think what you're, in two ways, you could be victimizing the desperation of someone. Mm-hmm. Or in the other side, you should be victimizing the greed of someone wanting something quicker or easier. And I think what we're actually seeing with a lot of people that are coming out with these hot takes and like, well, this new study says this one thing that no one else has ever said, that to me, when I see a research paper that comes out that goes, here's an answer that no one has ever said before, that no one has ever used, but it's actually more right than the thing everyone else does, I immediately go, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, no, in 2022, you don't have a new way to train the pack that's better than the way we've been training the pack since we started training packs.
Absolutely.
Like, there's no way. But what it is you attract an audience that's either desperate or greedy to know something that no one else does, right? And you're seeing that. Like, you're seeing the people that go, oh, bench press is a shit exercise for packs. None of them have a big bench press. Right? And that's the equivalent of what you said. If someone born in 1992 can't criticize somebody who's been doing it for 30 years. You don't get to. You have only existed as long as this person has been in that industry. If you don't have a very big bench press, you can't tell me that bench press isn't good. Maybe you're not good at bench press, therefore it's not good for you. So I think that's my big thing that just irks me so much. Like, if some big yoked mammoth dude came over and he was shredded of his fucking mind and he was like, hey man, like, I don't really think bench press is good, I'd probably go, well, just show me whatever the fuck it is that you do. But if some kid wheels in to the fucking gym and goes, hey man, squats are shit, I'm not listening to anything he has to say.
You know where the missing link in all of this is, though, too, right? Like, this is all critical thinking that's absent, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I mean, I'm trying to simplify a complex issue down into one thing here, but that's the one thing that that's one thing that you get out of experience is if, I mean, this is supposed to be the role of university or of higher education, is to teach critical thinking skills. And I understand that's not necessarily the path for everyone, but you do get that through experience too, right? Is the idea at least to be able to dissect and understand the things that are in your world, in your profession that you're doing over this time. Right, so to develop those critical thinking skills will separate you from how the media uses this to manipulate you. Yes. And I know that sounded very conspiracy theory-ish, and I don't want to go that way, but I'm using the word media here to capture social media, not just traditional.
Yeah,
absolutely. When you see a new research article that comes out that says high rep sets are more effective for hypertrophy than low rep sets, is okay. So first off, read the fucking article.
Yes.
Yeah. And in the article, you'll see that they put them on a leg extension machine, and they had a very fixed set of variables, and that the control group was doing sets of 10 to RIR 20. right? The actual fixed group was just training hard. But the media is going to take this and they're going to look at this and say, high rep sets are better for hypertrophy.
Yeah.
And that's it. They're going to throw everything else out.
Also,
right?
look at who's posting it. Just look for 2 seconds at who posted the article.
How big are your legs?
And just go like, what is this? Because I think you make a great point, Matt, which is like this idea of critical thinking, right? And one of the first steps in critical thinking is understanding what the intention of the information was, right? Like, I'm interacting with information now. How did it get to me? Where did it come from?
Yeah, and study, the thing about when we bring this in the scientific context is studies don't necessarily make concrete conclusions. They make suggestions.
Good
more
studies.
often than not.
Good studies.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a good point that you're making, right? It's like, and this is the thing about ethical research. A good study or a good doctor or scientist or person, a good expert on something, never says something is objectively true. They usually say things like it would suggest to us. Like, you love history. No good historian goes like, they were all 6 feet tall and really strong. They would go, well, we found a bunch of armor, and it suggests these guys were probably this fucking height and jacked out of their mind.
Yeah.
Right? Or it's like all the shoes were small. It suggests to us these people had small feet. They're not even saying that they all did. They just go, the evidence would say.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And that's a good study. Somebody just coming out and yelling at things, at things like, well, the study concludes that this is now true. It's like, that's a bad study. That's saying that you can no longer research the topic, right? To say something is objectively true is to close the book. Yeah. And that's not science. I think science is an open book.
Of course, yeah. Everything that we discuss is not a black and white science. It's a gradient.
Yeah.
Right? Like the bench press isn't a great exercise for the pec. I mean, is it? I don't really care, to be honest.
Correct.
I just get a ton of tension on my chest whenever I do it.
And then therefore it is good.
Yeah.
Well, in an aspect of that, whenever we're talking about new studies, because it's the new thing, the feeling around that, the excitement that no one else is doing this or using this information, so it becomes kind of integrated into how people are promoting or discussing. A part of science is it repeatable? Mm-hmm. And that's the tough thing with always just running firstly to new research studies or like new science. Let's see if it's repeatable. I mean, there's been businesses that have bankrupt people just based on like, oh, this new information, the hype of it, the feeling of it, where the technology wasn't there.
Yeah.
A little squared blood box, reminiscent of anything, but
shout out Silicon
Thanos.
Valley.
but you know, is there repeatability to it? Is there something that not only in these extreme circumstances of 18 to 20-year-olds where, you know, the variables were very, very controlled, can this go out to the masses and actually be beneficial? And I think that's, like you guys were alluding to with science, that it's could be. There's gray to it. This is what it's suggesting us, where it gets bastardized once it leaves that. It's the hype of it. It's the feeling of it. It's how we can sell this and how we can turn a profit into it. And a lot of times, to kind of go back to your point, like feeling and hope is, those are used as tools a lot of times of how do you feel about this, rather than back to experience. Like, experience takes feeling out of it. I don't have to feel a way about it because I have 20 years of doing this. I understand how people are going to react, how they're going to respond, how to implement this, when and why to implement it, or when I shouldn't, and like why this will create issues, understanding the context around everything. But people are so quick just to fall into the instantaneous, I feel this, or like I'm hopeful of this, and it can be utilized in our space to a negative, or to like have a bad influence on people, or just to build a bullshit business upon.
Yeah, that's where the biggest or the most cruel reality of, I guess, what they refer to as like little t truth, the stuff that isn't concrete, like, oh, sky is blue, right? That's maybe what they refer to as big T truth. Any critical thinking majors out there, please do correct me on this.
And the T has to do with testosterone, by the way.
The T has to do with testosterone.
Of course, because it can be nothing else.
The cruel reality of little t truth is it takes one contrary instance to disprove the entire hypothesis, which is like, that's a discrete mathematics concept, right? If you have a hypothesis,
no one knows what that is besides you.
Well, let's say you have like say 2 is an even number, okay? And for some reason, pretend that we live in this weird reality that there is an instance of 2 that isn't a real number.
The internet.
There could be, sure, okay. On the internet, two isn't an even number, but there could be a million variants of 2 that are even numbers and 1 that's not. Now the entire hypothesis is invalid as a result of the one invalid case.
Yeah, I always tell people to ask one more question, like the way you can tell someone. This is kind of like your point. I think I'm oversimplifying what you're saying, but it's the idea like when someone tells you something, ask them one more question about the thing they said, and if they can't explain any of it, then it's just not true.
Yeah.
It's like if somebody comes up to you and they're like this, and you go, "What about this?" and they go, "Well, I'm just telling you what I read," and you go, "Well, I'm not going to take any of that away. Thank you. Goodbye."
Yeah.
Everybody just ask them one more question. Like, why is a good one? Well, why? And when someone goes, well, I don't have to explain why. It's like, don't listen to anything that guy says.
Yeah. If somebody doesn't have to explain something to you, it means they don't have a fucking clue.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And yeah, I don't know. This is the most frustrating topic in the whole world to me, because I think, and Matt, I think me and Matt play good like devil's advocates on this podcast in a way, because it is like these totally different experiences and ways of thinking. But it's like I look at Matt as like the technology guy, because I'm not the technology guy. And the way I interpret technology is this idea that I think expertise and experience is becoming devalued in our society, because as technology, I don't want to say improves, but as technology evolves, I think the windows in time that make technology redundant get shorter.
Yes, it absolutely does.
And I think what happens with that is actually why we don't value experience anymore. Because nobody has a lot of experience at any one thing, because it's fucking different all the time. Right. Whereas for so long, like, you fixed a car with a wrench and like a hammer. Mm-hmm. And you'd go to a guy and you go, this guy has 80 years experience fixing a car. And you're like, oh shit, yeah, okay, they've been doing it the same forever. But now you go to fix a car and you're like, you don't even care if he has experience. You're like, do you know how to do the electric car thing? And the guy's like, no, I only fix these other cars. I'm like, well, I need a guy who knows how to fix this car. And that's kind of where we've got to with a lot of things, right? Like, no technology is around long enough for people to get experience with it. It just becomes redundant, and we move on to a new thing where it's like someone just needs to know that one new thing.
Yeah, and I believe that's where the evolution of the abstract thought process that comes with acquiring the ability to negotiate a domain becomes important, right? Is to use the examples of hypotheses and finding the one thing that invalidates it. Just speaking from my own perspective as throughout my engineering career and training career, I have made a lot of really shitty hypotheses.
Yeah, same.
And I've been wrong many times over, but the longer I did it, the better my hypotheses became. Yeah. And the longer I did it, the more often I ran into the one false, invalid instance that invalidated the hypothesis I made earlier in my career, right? So that means the more that I'm doing this, the better my hypotheses are, the more true they end up becoming, right? And that sort of thought process transcends technology and frameworks and like the concrete differences that change every era when something turns over, because it's an abstract general understanding of the topic at hand, right? With a mechanic who's been working in a garage for 50 years, probably they might not be able to fix a problem on a new car because they might not have the tools to do it, but they could probably diagnose it.
Yeah,
and they could probably diagnose it very reliably.
And I think it's interesting, right? Because like what I always think, and like I always like kind of like give more benefit to the ways I've failed than the ways I'm successful, because I think success or being right, and this is another way I would interpret the information that you receive from people, is being successful and being right is more dangerous to acquiring knowledge than being wrong. Right. Because you don't ever have to think about it again. If you just show up and you're just good at something, you never learned about it. You just went, well, I'm going to keep doing this till it breaks. I want to talk to the guy who's like, I didn't know how to do this for like 20 years. And I tried 100 different ways, and then I finally figured it out. Because you know why? Because he can tell you every way to not do it. Mm-hmm. The guy who's right, if his right way doesn't work for you, then the next thing he tells you might be completely wrong. At least I can go to you with all your years of experience at something when it comes to fucking, making a website even, or running something in e-commerce, and I can ask you about it, or attaching an app, and you go, don't do it this way. Like, and that whenever I ask you stuff, that's always the advice you give me. Like, I even asked you about Discord and things like that. And the initial conversations you and I always have are always you telling me the things you cannot do, which is so valuable, because that's experience, though. You go, definitely don't do it this way because this is going to happen. And I'm like, that is better than you having the answer for me. Yeah. Because this answer, if it doesn't work, we're both fucked.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there has to be a lot of very embarrassing snafus before you get to the point where you're mastering a thing.
The amount of times I've misloaded a bar or not racked it, Yeah. Like, I remember telling clients, I'd always be like, hey, when you put the bar back, I don't want you to set it on each peg. I want you to smash the rack with the barbell and slide it down. And they're like, why? I'll just look and it goes in. I'm like, because it one day won't. Yeah. And you will murder yourself. Because I've done it. I've gone like, whack, and then the bar windmill me and kill me.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, I tell you to slide the bar down because I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Everything I've ever told a client when it comes to training is the result of me not doing this good piece of information I'm giving you and suffering terrible consequences.
Yeah, like the way I like to see this in my head is just think of it as like a racetrack, right? And I'm in a car, and the more years of experience I have, the narrower the racetrack becomes, right? And in a good way. Like, let's pretend that there's like very bouncy walls on either side of the track that'll keep you on course. When I'm early in my career and I'm doing my things, I'm kind of all over the place, right? I have no idea I'm wrong. I don't know I'm wrong until I hit the boundary, right? But every time that I hit the boundary, they come in a little bit more. They come in a little bit more. And after I've been doing this for a couple decades, then suddenly we're dealing with a very fine-tuned track. I'm still going to make mistakes.
Of course.
Absolutely, but my mistakes are going to be very slight deviations, and I'll be able to bounce back on them onto the track without really anything going wrong.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is understanding the person that you're getting the information from. The education and information coming from experience, it helps expedite your process. Like that's the goal of being able to share your information, is you're trying to expedite somebody else's process so they don't have to replicate the whole track. We can narrow it a little bit for them. They're still going to make their own, they're still going to bump the walls. They're still going to have to sort things out, but hey, let me save you a little bit of time so you can keep focusing forward and not just have to bounce around and kind of waste your time through experience, through that education. And I think that's why people need to be like, take that one step more, ask that question, why, or explain that a little bit more in getting their information and finding out if that experience really holds up, because experience is valuable. Like it saves that time, and it gives you the context that a lot of people don't have when asking the question, or just accepting the answer is black and white. This is it because this person is saying it. Go a couple layers deep, because even for you, it could be correct, but let's add some context to it where it doesn't matter in your setting.
Yeah, I think something valuable to look at too is think of 2 decades of experience. Yeah. That means 20 years of successfully staying in that industry.
Yeah.
Right? If you're not good at something, you're just going to fuck off and do something else, especially in the space that we're in, where we're talking like either face-to-face or online training.
Yeah.
Right? Is that if you can't talk to a person and keep them engaged and get them a good workout in an hour, you're not going to survive in that industry for months, let alone years, let alone decades. Right? And if you don't acquire the skills in which you can do that face-to-face with person, then you probably don't possess the skills it's going to take to move online and do that when you're not face-to-face, when you can't touch that person.
Yeah.
You have to have very good communication skills and a very good precise understanding of what's going to happen in that 1 hour session where that person's in the gym. But you can't acquire that knowledge if you don't do it wrong a bunch of times in person in that scenario, and you don't learn from those things. So 20 years of experience is 20 years of successfully failing in that industry and refining your craft so that those bumpers get closer and closer and closer. So even if I talk to someone online for a half hour and I say they want to do online training, I have a very vivid picture in my head of what that's going to look like for that person when they walk in the gym start to finish. And I might be wrong, but I can correct that really, really quickly. The deviations from that are going to be very few, and they're going to be very minor. But the reason that I can do that is because I've failed every direction a ton of times, and I've taken that failure and I've learned from it. Is that every time you hit that wall, it should take you, like you said, less time to hit that wall. Or you should see if you're deviating that direction sooner and sooner. So it's, I saw this person's, 5th metatarsal head lift when they squatted. They might lack internal rotation. Maybe you can identify that as they do a squat over a video call, as opposed to, having 85% on the bar and saying, oh shit, something's going wrong. Yeah. Why does it look this way? It's that you just peel back those layers over time, and you can identify that faster and faster and faster. So the more experience you have, you can now interpret and acquire information and digest it and apply it in the appropriate way, but you can do it in a very effective and efficient manner. And I think that's what people aren't understanding when they undervalue experience in our industry.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point of talking about like in-person experience as well, because I think the value of in-person experience for me was I interacted with so many more people at such a higher frequency.
Yes.
Like I worked in a commercial gym.
You learn
like
so fast.
10 of those hours of that day, we're talking to 10 different human beings. And like what Matt's touched on before is everyone is very different, but everyone, there's also like these tribes and these patterns that people follow. And it's like from working in an in-person gym, and you said talking to real people, I can hear things that people tell me that it's like, man, 14 people this week said the exact, it's like you're reading a script to me about your eating habits or your training. Or like 14 people said this exact same thing that you did. I'm like, maybe your case isn't so isolated and unique. I'm like, what are the things, the critical thinking? It's like, what leads you to say this to me? You know, and also, is it a true or is it a false thing, right? Is it a perception or is it a reality?
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, but the more people I interact with, like the example I always give when I worked in person was I stopped using the language, what do you eat during the day? I stopped asking that because the question I needed to ask was, what did you eat today? And I only realized that because I would do consults with people. I do 3 consults a day. And by Friday, everyone somehow for lunch ate ground turkey, spinach, and yogurt.
Or I eat relatively healthy.
I eat relatively healthy.
Everyone's answer.
And the description is kind of the same.
Yeah.
I have like oatmeal and a grapefruit for breakfast. And I do like a ground turkey with at lunch with this. And then dinner is this. And I called somebody out once. I went, is that what you had? And they went, yeah. I went, that's really weird. You're the 7th person this week who's had that exact same lunch.
Wow,
and
how strange.
Yeah, and I was like, where'd you read that? And they like literally were like, oh, sometimes I have it. I read it here. And I was like, oh, yeah, this really popular magazine or this really popular person on Instagram.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, of course. And I would start to follow the things that these people would tell me from. And I would read stuff, and I'd go in a consult, someone tell me something. I was like, do you follow this person on Instagram? Is that what their shopping cart looks like? Did you get ground turkey, sweet potatoes, Ezekiel bread, Greek yogurt, and avocados? Did you? Is that what you really got? Is there a shortage on all of these at the grocery store because everyone this week is buying that? And it's like, yeah, but that's a real world experience, right? Yes. If you work on the internet, you don't have experience with people, and somebody says that to you, you're going to go, oh shit, well, that's pretty good. And then 3 months later, you're going to be like, why is this person still fat?
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's like, because they're not doing that because you would know if you had the in-person experience, right? It's like pain. Pain is this huge mystery to us. And the better I got around understanding pain and discomfort came from working in person with people in real life. Didn't come from anything I ever read. It came from hanging out with somebody and knowing in a session if they were actually trying or not trying.
Yes.
If they were doing something that caused them pain or not. People would be like, it hurts. And I would be watching them train. I'd be like, I understand that's how you feel. But there's nothing here that would be if you are injured doing whatever you're doing, you need to go to the hospital right away. Yeah. Something's terribly wrong with you, you know? And it's like, you just get better at interpreting these things, but it's experience. Like, very few things I've ever read have made paradigm shifts in how I interact with people. Interactions with people change my very next interaction with a person, right? It's not something you read. It's an experiment, right? It's like doing something. You like write a code, and then you go, that didn't work. The next time you write that code, you're going to do it very different, right? That's the driving around the racetrack. And it's like, you get to do those way more with experience than me reading 10 articles and then just continuing to make more hypotheses. I don't want to hypothesize more. I want to experiment more, not hypothesize more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a specific crucial quality that's needed in order to profit from this. And that's the ability as a human adult to take a piece of information that someone says that's contrary to something that you know, and if they can provide a convincing argument and proof, being able to adopt that new point of view,
accept
right?
it.
You have to.
Yes.
You cannot defend. You cannot cling on to what you know once something has been disproven in front of your own eyes.
Yeah, I think that starts with the realization that you don't really know much.
We don't know anything, really.
Yeah,
absolutely
and the things
nothing.
that we think we know is largely based off of our experience.
Yes, the perception, right?
Yes.
It's like what we believe to be true until, like you said, it's proven otherwise.
Right.
And once it's proven otherwise, that thing that was true is never true again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the Earth was flat for how many years?
Yeah.
And then once we proved it's not flat, barring a certain group of people on the internet, we've all agreed that, well, that was wrong.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
Like there's no, and that's the other thing too. Like I like what you said, Matt, because sometimes what I need people to do is think about what is the consequence of me being wrong?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nothing. You just go, that guy's right. And you go, how does this affect me? Well, it doesn't. Now I have actually better information. And just accept it and just move on.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that I always like to reference whenever like to throw chaos theory out there and saying how we don't really know anything and we're just kind of just the consequence of a lot of luck, right?
Yeah.
That sort of this perfect set of conditions that that gave us the world that we know is that the brain named itself. And
I
every
hate when you
time,
say that.
every time I say that to someone, that's the response, right?
It hurts my brain.
And if you think that, it's like, well, what other shit did we make up?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out we made up everything.
Yeah.
We made up everything. What's time? Time is a system that we developed to measure the passage of time. Like it's the word is in the definition, right?
Yeah.
Like
we made the problem and gave ourselves the answer.
Yeah.
It's just actually like one sign of something very unethical, right? They always tell you to watch for that. Watch for people who solve a problem that they themselves create.
Yes.
Yeah. That's charlatanism, right?
As a kid, I used to get really anxious thinking about words. And this is like a true thing that I always come back to. It's as much as you and I think of Requiem for a Dream. I think of the word, this is silly, it sounds very silly when I say it out loud as an adult, but butterfly. This word always made me anxious as a kid because I didn't understand. I was like, why is it a butterfly? I know what a fly looks like, and I know what butter is, and I can't understand why we've decided to name this thing a butterfly. And I know it's a silly example, but this is the thing where I'm just like, it doesn't make logical sense, right? And it's this idea. It's like things are sometimes chaotic, and they just are. And what is the consequence to it being called a butterfly? Like, it affects nothing to me.
Yeah.
That somebody says it, and I go, that's what that thing's called. And, like, it doesn't affect my reality. There's not, like, a split in my reality into a different void now because we have a silly name for something, and it exists the way it exists.
Yeah, like, for better or worse, it was likely one Anglo-Saxon tribesman who clocked another over the head and said, no, it's a butterfly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was like, I listened to a podcast once on the English language and how insane it is.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so many different languages that we just took and shoved together in ways that if you, like, reference the origins of some words, it's completely insane in the other language that we're using, like the combination of words we use. But yeah, it's just very interesting. But I like the idea of thinking about it being chaotic, right? And like your acceptance of things, right? That's the thing I always think about with new information is the first thing I always think when I encounter something that's new, first of all, I always like to look at who's telling it to me. And if I dislike them, I'll just pretend that it's fake. And then once I get past that part of my ego, I always say to myself, what is the consequence of this information? Because people tell you stuff all day that's just so noisy. I don't know if you feel the same way.
All the time.
People are just giving me information. I'm like, please, will you not tell me anything more about what you want to talk about? Because I don't need it.
All the time.
And I'll even say to people, like, they'll say a bunch of stuff, and I'll even ask them, like, can we make this less noisy? And just please tell me the facts, right? And I remember being a manager, managing a commercial gym, and I took this course on, like, having crucial, hard conversations with people. And part of it was literally, like, managing the noise. So, like, let somebody tell their story and then repeating back to them only the parts that were factual, that we could prove about the story. Like, why were you late? And then they talk to you for 45 minutes and then just repeating back to them the factual things that occurred. Like, you did not make it on the bus, correct? Yes. And therefore you were late. And they go, that's why. And they go, yes. And it's like, okay, so how are you never late for the bus again? Right? Yeah. And, like, that's all we need from this. Everything else is noise, right? It's not something that in this reality we can prove is fact. The other thing I ask myself all the time is, why would a reasonable, rational person do or say the thing they did? You know, and it's like, I think that's a good step into critical thinking about the person who's giving you the information. It's how I think when someone tells me about bench press being bad. I think to myself, why would a reasonable, rational person hate on this exercise that I and others seem to enjoy? And then I look at them and I go, that is why.
Yeah. One thing to remember about people who make propositions of any kind, regardless of the quality of the proposition, if it's good or bad, sometimes they're just wrong.
Yes.
And sometimes they're so wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and that's the reality of the situation. It's like the finding flaws in your parents thing. It's like, you know, these are the people that you've been listening to your entire life, the Instagram, everything. These are the types of people you've been listening to your entire life. Thus, what they say is gospel, but that's not actually true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's taking what we understand as Canadians about driving and then coming to Miami.
Yeah.
And understanding that you don't signal when you change lanes.
No, you signal, but with your gun.
Yes, exactly.
It's
and
chaos.
you just change lanes anyways.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing, right? Like, what we know to be true somewhere is not true here. In this reality, how we would approach driving would almost be dangerous to this reality.
Yeah, but on the flip side of this coin, if you take somebody who has grown up here and got the driver's license here, this is just another day to them.
Correct. And imagine if you took that person, you put them in Toronto and had them drive.
Yeah, the fuck is everyone driving so slow for?
Exactly, right? Because these things are based around that experience, right? Which forms that reality. And then, like you said, it's like, can we disprove or disprove this?
Yeah.
I think that's it then.
Yeah, that's I would say that's a good rundown on the stuff that makes me angry on a daily basis.
All right.
Sweet.
I'm less angry.